In this third video in the series of hands-on practice and introduction to JavaScript, we're going to look at arrays and we're going to look at for loops, one of the kinds of loops that we've got in JavaScript. So as before on this page, we will open our console and then we will scroll down. We've already done demo 1, demo 2, demo 3, demo 4, and now there are 2 left, arrays and loops. All right, so we'll begin with demo 5, arrays. So what is an array? An array begins with the keyword var, like a variable, but an array is different. It does have a name, like a variable. Okay, so we'll name this array fruits, but here's where it's different, okay? It begins with a square bracket, it ends with a square bracket, and a semicolon because you're populating a new array, and then inside it can have more than one thing. It can have as many things as you need, and if they are strings, you'll notice that we have to be careful to type the comma outside the quotation marks. Otherwise, the comma would become part of the string. Each item in my array has 2 quotation marks. Each item is a string. I could put numbers in the array. I can even mix numbers and strings in one array, but we'll make it simple. It's called fruits. It's got 4 fruits in it. All right. So if I do our basic alert function, and in that alert I pass in the name of our array, what am I going to see when I press return? I'm going to see our list in the order I typed it, and I'm going to see commas added but no quotation marks and no spaces. All right, so this is just feeding back the array to us so that we can see what it is. We're going to see how can we access things inside the array. So we don't always have to see all the things in the array, all the items. We can, in fact, look at just one. So the first one I want to look at is the item in the array fruits with the index of 1. All right, so I'm closing the parentheses on the alert function, adding my semicolon, and you think for yourself what is going to come up if I say, give me the item in the array that has an index of 1. Is this what you expected? Because remember, our array is grapes, apples, oranges, and cantaloupes. And I asked for index 1, not item 1, but index 1. The next thing you're going to learn about arrays is how does a programming language count things? And programming languages and computers in general pretty much always start counting with 0. Humans start with 1, but computers start with 0. So if we do the same thing we just did, alert, fruits, and instead we ask for the item with the index of 0, think what it's going to be. All right, so this is our first item. So our first item has an index of 0. Our second item has an index of 1. And our third and fourth items, let's try this, fruits. Okay, index 2 plus fruits, index 3. And what are we going to get, right? Remember, you know what's in our array, and this will be the item with the index 2 and the item with the index 3. This is what we get. So this is like when we concatenated before. If we concatenate 2 strings together, we don't get any spaces or commas or anything. They just get mashed together. And so that's what we got when we asked for the item with index 2 and the item with index 3. All right. So if we wanted to pull those things out and separate them in a normal looking English language way, what we would do is we'd get fruits index 2, and we'd do what we did before with strings. We would add some text in quotation marks with some plus signs to concatenate the item and the string space and space, and the second item from our list, actually the item with index number 3, paren, semicolon. Okay, so we'll be learning more about arrays later because they're pretty important. But one last little thing, and that is working with the array that we already have that has 4 different fruits in it. And what if we wanted to replace one of the items in our array with a different value? Since each of the items already have an index number, an index place in the array, let's say you want to replace oranges with lemons. So you would look at oranges and you'd say, well, which index does that have? Grapes is 0, apples is 1, oranges is 2. Okay, so that's index 2. And so the way to change that would be to reassign the value of the thing in the array. Okay, so we will say that is index 2. And we will make it instead have lemons instead of oranges, right? So when we look at our fruits array now, if we look at the whole thing, what we'll see is our same array, but with one replacement. The third item, that is the thing with index 2, used to be oranges, now it's lemons. So our next topic in this fast introductory tour of important elements of JavaScript and programming languages is loops. And we're only going to look at one kind of loop, the for loop, and it works pretty well with arrays. But the first example I'm going to give you doesn't have an array in it. I'm just going to use numbers. So what does a for loop do? A for loop repeats a set of instructions until it's finished. How does it know when it's finished? Well, how does it know when it starts? So the for loop has to be told, where do you start, where do you end, and what do you do in between? So before I run the for loop, I'm going to ask you to look at what's already written here. First, we've got the keyword for, all right? And that is followed by a set of things in a pair of parentheses. So within the pair of parentheses, there are 3 things. There is, where does the loop begin? How long does the loop last, or when does it stop? And what to do each time that the loop runs. Okay, so those 3 things are here. Where does it start? Where does it end? And what are you going to do each time that this loop runs? And after that, in the curly braces, are you starting to see a pattern here? A keyword, parentheses, curly braces, same pattern we had in the if statement, okay? Here in the curly braces, these are the instructions that will run every time. So if this runs 100 times, the stuff in the curly braces will execute 100 times. And there can be more than one line, but generally when we start out, we'll give you one line so you can see what it's doing. So I am going to copy and paste the 3 lines. So I will copy, then I will paste. All right, and now when I press return, this for loop will execute. So what do we see here? It basically counted by tens, starting with 0. It went 0, 10, 20. This is what it did each time, all right? So that is what the instructions told it to do. Console log means write it to the console or log it to the console, right? So it did that how many times? Well, it did it starting with 0. It did it until it reached 50. That was when it ended. Less than or equal to 50, so it did 50. And each time it ran, it did this interesting little thing. It added 10 to I. So here we've made a variable I, var I, Okay, wouldn't have to be named I. It could be named anything. It could be named Apple. We made a new variable. We started it with 0, and we said, do the stuff in the curly braces until I has reached 50. And each time we run it, we're going to add 10. So console log I, what is I the first time? The first time, I is 0. So we see 0 on the console. Then I gets 10 added to it. So the second time, 0 plus 10 is 10. So we see 10. The third time this runs, what happens? 10 gets added again, so we see 20, and so on. So this is your usual introduction to for loops, is counting by increments of 1, by increments of 5, in this case, increments of 10. Now, if we had made I less than or equal to 100, it would have gone 10, 20, 30, 40, up to 100. If we had made it 20, it would have stopped with 20. Okay, so this is the structure of a for loop. Let's clear this and scroll up a bit and look at another example of a for loop. So how is this one different? Can you tell before I run it what is different? First, where does it start? Second, where does it end? Third, what does it do each time it runs? And what are we going to see in the console log? Console log instructions are exactly the same as the for loop we ran before, but everything else is different. The same numbers are used, but in a different order. So instead of starting with 0, we start with, instead of ending at 50, we end at, instead of adding 10 every time, we do what? So let me copy and paste, and we'll see if you knew what it was going to do. I'm about to hit return. Is that what you knew would happen? If so, you're starting to get the hang of it. I encourage you to play with for loops because you'll learn more if you try to run your own things, not just stuff that somebody else showed you. I've got more to tell you about arrays, but I'm going to put that in a second video where I'm going to connect the arrays and the loops and show you how to loop through an array.